Aldi has built its entire reputation around one simple promise: cheaper prices. But over the last 2 years, that promise has been tested by regulators, rival supermarkets, and consumer campaigners. And in more than one case, Aldi was forced to explain exactly what shoppers were being shown. One Christmas advert claimed Aldi was the home of Britain's cheapest Christmas dinner. The comparison looked convincing, until regulators started looking at what was actually being compared. And then there was a loaf of bread where the name on the front put one ingredient front and centre, while the ingredient list told a very different story. These aren't rumours or viral social media claims. They're formal complaints, official rulings, and documented responses from Aldi itself. So what actually went wrong? We're counting down 7 details, from the claims that looked harmless at first to the one that ultimately changed what shoppers saw on the shelf. And the biggest issue isn't necessarily what Aldi claimed, it's what shoppers were expected to notice for themselves. Let's start with number 7, the home of Britain's cheapest Christmas dinner. In December 2023, Aldi ran a 4-page wraparound newspaper advert. Not a small box tucked in a corner, but the very first thing you saw on the front of the newspaper and the very last thing on the back. That's premium ad real estate. The kind you pay serious money for, and the kind that's built to be read by people who are only half paying attention. The headline: the home of Britain's cheapest Christmas dinner. Why go anywhere else? Think about what that sentence is actually doing. It's not a suggestion, it's not one of the cheapest. It's not even, we think we're cheaper. That's an absolute claim, the cheapest in Britain, full stop, positioned to close the conversation before it starts. Why go anywhere else, it says. Stop comparing. Aldi has already won, and it's landing in front of millions of readers at the exact moment they're planning their biggest food shop of the year. Sainsbury's didn't think so, and they had the standing to say something about it. They filed a formal complaint with the Advertising Standards Authority on 3 separate grounds. Not one technicality, 3 distinct challenges, all filed at once, all eventually upheld. Here's what most people don't realise about how the ASA actually works. It isn't a government department handing down fines. It operates under the CAP Code, the Committee of Advertising Practices rulebook. And when it rules against an advert, the sanction isn't financial, it's structural. The advert gets pulled from future use in that form, and the company is told, on the record, exactly which rules it broke. In this case, the ruling cited breaches across multiple sections at once: misleading advertising, insufficient substantiation, unclear qualification of claims, rules around price presentation, and rules governing comparisons that name an identifiable competitor. That's not a single slip. That's a ruling that found Aldi's advert fell short of the code in several distinct ways simultaneously. That's the headline claim. But the headline wasn't even the biggest problem. The numbers underneath it were at number 6. Aldi's comparison wasn't comparing like with like. Here's what Aldi printed: Sainsbury's £44.81, Aldi £33.80, save over 20% on your Christmas dinner. The arithmetic isn't the issue. The issue is that Aldi built 2 baskets that weren't actually equivalent and presented them side by side as though they were. The advert pictured a whole roast turkey, but Aldi's pricing was based on a turkey crown. Just the breast portion. No legs, no wings. A fundamentally smaller and cheaper product than what the image showed sitting on the plate. On top of that, the visual spread showed a Yorkshire pudding and stuffing alongside the turkey, making them look like part of the dinner being advertised. Neither item was included in the cost comparison at all. They were on the plate in the picture, clearly part of the meal the customer was being shown. But when the price was worked out, they simply disappeared. They were in the picture. They weren't in the maths. Think about what that actually does to the number. A shopper looking at that page sees a full traditional roast for £33.80 versus £44.81 at Sainsbury's. What they were actually being shown was a smaller cut of meat with 2 visible menu items quietly excluded from the total. A whole turkey with all the trimmings cost more than a crown with 2 side dishes left off the receipt, and that gap is exactly the kind of detail a shopper has no way of spotting from a printed advert alone. The ASA was specific. The comparison had to be based on genuinely equivalent products, and Aldi's wasn't. And this is the part that makes it hard to brush aside. The gap between what Aldi showed and what Aldi costed isn't a rounding error. It's a structural mismatch built into the advert itself. The image told a more expensive story than the maths behind it did, and a shopper standing in the kitchen trying to recreate what they saw on the page would end up spending more than £33.80 the moment they reached for a whole bird and a box of stuffing. The image did work, the numbers weren't actually doing. And even if you ignore the turkey, there's another problem hiding in the comparison. At number 5, Aldi compared products that were nearly double each other's size. This is where Aldi's comparison becomes much harder to defend because it isn't about broad claims or hero images, it's about grams. Aldi's cost comparison included own-label pigs in blankets from multiple supermarkets. When the ASA checked the actual weights, the range ran from 175 grams to 300 grams. The largest pack was nearly double the smallest, and yet Aldi priced them against each other as though they were the same product. Nobody buying a Christmas dinner is indifferent to whether they're getting 175 grams or 300 grams of food. That difference changes how many people you can serve and how much you need to buy. A cheaper price means very little when you're comparing it with a pack nearly twice the size without making that gap visible. The ASA's conclusion was straightforward. Because pack size would reasonably influence a shopper's decision, stripping the weight out meant the comparison couldn't be properly trusted. Aldi pointed to a link on the final page of the ad, but a link in small text on the back page isn't the same as putting the weight next to the price where a shopper is actually looking. The qualification can't be something the customer has to hunt for after the headline has already made its impression. So far, every problem we've looked at was hiding inside the comparison, but the next one was different. It was hiding in 3 words. At number 4, Aldi's 2022 price locked claim meant something different than it looked. Buried in the same advert was a separate line: 2022 price locked. On its own, that reads like a guarantee. Prices haven't moved since 2022, full stop. It's the kind of short, confident phrase that does a lot of reassurance work in very few words. But when the ASA examined it, Aldi couldn't back that claim up across the board. The phrase was found to be unclear about what it actually covered, whether it applied to every item shown or only some of them, and over what time window. Supermarkets change prices on fresh and short shelf-life goods frequently, sometimes week to week. A blanket claim like price locked sitting next to a Christmas dinner spread needed to specify exactly which products and for exactly how long, or it risked implying a guarantee that didn't actually hold across the whole basket. Shoppers reading 2022 price locked printed next to 2023 prices would reasonably take it to mean this year's prices match last year's across the board. That's a specific checkable promise. But Aldi gave no boundary around which products it applied to, and no clarity on how long that lock held once the advert stopped running. It's a smaller line item than the others, but it matters because it's the same pattern showing up again inside one single advert, and this time it's not even a comparison. It's a standalone claim, a short, confident phrase doing more reassurance work than the substantiation behind it could actually support. Price locked sounds like a promise a shopper can hold Aldi to, but without a defined scope, it's closer to a mood than a commitment. 3 words carrying a lot of implied weight, precisely because they were vague enough that nobody stops to ask what they actually cover. Before we continue, I've spent years standing in supermarket aisles so you don't have to. The supermarket method is everything I've learned from hundreds of supermarket products, distilled into one simple guide you can use on every shopping trip. Scan the QR code on your screen, grab your copy, and let's get back to the rankings. And then the biggest problem with the headline became impossible to ignore. At number 3, Aldi wasn't even the independent winner it claimed to be. Everything we've looked at so far, the turkey, the weights, the price lock, sits underneath the headline. But this next detail doesn't just weaken the headline, it undercuts the entire claim on its own terms. The which, research that Aldi built its claim on, didn't actually crown Aldi the outright winner. Which named both Aldi and Lidl as joint budget-friendly Christmas dinner award recipients that year. The difference between the two came down to 4 pence. 4 pence. That's the entire gap between the supermarket advertising itself as the home of Britain's cheapest Christmas dinner, why go anywhere else, and its nearest discount rival. The word Britain's also implied a comparison across the whole market when the underlying research had actually only measured 7 supermarkets, not every retailer a shopper might reasonably consider. So Aldi took a near tie with one specific competitor based on a 7-retailer sample and restructured it into an unqualified national superlative. Not joint cheapest alongside Lidl, not cheapest among 7 tested retailers. The home of Britain's cheapest Christmas dinner, why go anywhere else? An unqualified, market-wide, conversation-ending claim built on a 4p margin that the underlying research itself didn't treat as a decisive win. There's a reason that matters more than it might first seem, which is a genuinely independent, well-regarded consumer organisation, and its endorsement carries weight precisely because it isn't paid marketing copy. When Aldi borrowed that credibility for an advert, the ASA was clear. The retailer inherits the responsibility to represent the underlying research accurately, not just favourably. Turning a 4p joint result into an unqualified national claim doesn't just stretch the maths. It takes the trust people place in an independent source and points it somewhere the source itself never actually went. If you want more breakdowns of the claims hiding behind supermarket marketing, subscribe, because the next case moves from the advert to the product itself. Forget the Christmas dinner for a second. Because Aldi's next problem wasn't in an advert at all, it was sitting on a supermarket shelf. At number 2, Aldi's dark rye sourdough was mostly wheat. This complaint didn't come from a rival supermarket's legal team. It came from a small food campaigning group called the Real Bread Campaign. People who do something most shoppers never think to do. Read the ingredients on the back of the pack, not just the name on the front. The product was Aldi's specially selected dark rye sourdough, part of Aldi's premium own label range. The name puts rye front and centre. The marketing puts rye front and centre. But the actual ingredients declaration told a different story. The first dominant ingredient listed wasn't rye flour. It was refined wheat flour. Rye flour was listed second, and nowhere on the pack did Aldi specify that the rye content was even the wholemeal variety typically associated with a genuine dark rye loaf. The Real Bread campaign raised it directly with Aldi first, in January, through a public message. Aldi's written response defended the name as what they called a customary description of this style of bread, arguing that UK food labelling rules allow an exemption for names that are commonly understood by consumers without needing a separate quantitative breakdown. The campaign didn't accept that explanation, and their argument is worth stating plainly. Under UK retained food information law, when a product name specifically emphasises one ingredient, in this case rye, in a way that could reasonably be read as making a defining claim, the retailer is required to state the actual percentage of that ingredient on the front of the pack. That's called a quantitative ingredients declaration, or QID. Aldi hadn't included one. The campaign also pushed back on the customary name defence itself, and their point was simple. When a British shopper sees dark rye on a premium label loaf, they reasonably picture a dense, wholemeal rye bread, the kind where rye is the main event, not a supporting act. They don't picture a loaf where refined wheat flour is listed first and rye is doing less than a third of the work. The name created an expectation that the ingredients list didn't support. Unable to resolve it directly with Aldi, the campaign escalated the complaint to trading standards, specifically the Public Protection and Integrated Enforcement team covering the area. By May, trading standards confirmed that changes were already underway. Aldi agreed to rename the loaf from dark rye sourdough to wheat and rye dark sourdough, a name that finally puts the dominant ingredient where a shopper can actually see it, and updated the legal declaration on the pack to state the rye content directly. 31%. 31%. Not the defining ingredient the original name implied. Just under a third of the loaf, with the rest made up of the ingredient the name never mentioned at all. It's a small case in commercial terms: one loaf, one own label range, one regional trading standards team. But the legal principle behind it applies to every single ingredient-led product name on every shelf in the country. If a name puts one ingredient in the spotlight, the law expects the label to back that claim up with an actual number, not just a listing further down the pack that most shoppers will never turn the box over to find. And that brings us to the part that matters more than the complaint itself. What actually changed? And finally, at number 1, what actually changed and why that's the part that matters most. This is the piece almost everyone skips past because refunds and rebrands don't generate the same reaction as the original claim. But this is genuinely the most important part of the whole story because it's the part that tells you whether the system actually works when someone pushes on it. And the answer in both cases is yes, but with a caveat that matters. In both cases, something changed. Not a statement issued to make headlines go away. An actual verifiable correction. After the ASA ruling, Aldi was told the Christmas advert could not run again in that form and that any future price lock or price comparison claims would need to be clearly substantiated, with the full basis for the comparison made available to shoppers, not buried behind a small link on a wraparound's back page. Aldi's own public response called the ruling a result of an advertising technicality, while also stating they remained confident customers would make significant savings shopping with them, which issued their own statement afterward, noting they'd sought assurances from Aldi that their research wouldn't be used that way again. After the bread labelling complaint, the correction was even more concrete. The product name changed. The back-of-pack declaration changed to show the real rye percentage. And it happened within a matter of months, not years, because a small campaigning group with no legal department and no advertising budget did something almost nobody else bothers to do. They read the label properly, then followed the process, all the way from a direct message to a formal trading standards referral. But here's the part that matters. Nobody at home sees the ASA ruling. Nobody sees the trading standards paperwork. They see the shelf. They see the advert, and that's exactly why these corrections matter. The uncomfortable truth sits right next to the encouraging part. Neither of these corrections happened because an internal review at Aldi caught the issue before the public ever saw it. The Christmas advert would have gone through a creative team, a legal review, a sign-off process, a media buy, and at no point in that chain did anyone flag that the comparison wasn't equivalent, or that the which result was a joint award, or that the weight differences made the price comparison misleading. Both corrections happened because someone outside the company, a rival retailer's legal team in one case, a small independent campaign group in the other, did the work of checking and then followed through. The advert ran for weeks before Sainsbury's complaint resolved. The loaf sat on shelves under its original name for months before the Real Bread campaign's complaint changed it. The system that catches a misleading superlative or an inaccurate ingredient name isn't switched off. It works, and it works well when someone uses it. But it's not automatic, it's not proactive, it waits to be triggered, which means every claim that nobody challenges, every product name that nobody flips over and checks stays exactly as it is. The correction only ever happens after someone checks. And the gap between when the claim goes out and when the correction arrives is filled with shoppers making decisions based on information that's already been found to be incomplete. This time, two separate someones did the checking. A rival retailer's compliance team in one case, a small bread campaign with a website and a principal in the other, and both times it worked. So what do you actually take away from all of this? The lesson here isn't that you should stop shopping at Aldi. It's much simpler than that. Aldi's reputation is built around value, and comparing prices across supermarkets can still be useful. But these cases show why the headline isn't always the whole story. A claim can look straightforward until you check what was actually being compared. A product name can sound obvious until you turn the pack around and read the ingredients. And in both of these cases, the correction only happened because someone looked closer and challenged what they found. The advert was stopped from being used in that form. The bread was renamed. The ingredient declaration was changed. So next time you see a supermarket promising the cheapest option, the biggest saving, or a product built around one particular ingredient, take 2 extra seconds. Check what's underneath the headline. Because sometimes the most important detail isn't the one printed in bold, it's the one you have to look for.